All right, Nick, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons coming out of Combine Week. There's always a lot of information flying around, updates on key players with teams. And this information we have on one Falcons key player, I think it's very interesting, sheds a new light on the whole situation. I think Falcons fans are going to love this update. But before we get into that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, let's get straight on into it. A great update on a Falcons player. I think it shows a more positive light and some expectations for the future for none other than possible star tight end Kyle Pitts. Let's get into the article and we can talk more about it on the other side. This is from NFL.com. It says, Falcons head coach Raheem Morris wants to see the best version of Kyle Pitts in 2025. Goes on to say he's always going to have to add the added pressure because of how high he was drafted, right? Falcons head coach Raheem Morris said this week at the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine via the team's website, Taryn Wack. He says, so we want to be able to get the young man out there and be the best version of him. We'll always make the right decision for the Falcons and we'll make the right decisions for us in order to get him going. We have to figure those things out. So, what does this say? I think it's indicating the Falcons, they're sticking with Kyle Pitts this season. They want to see him on the field. They want to be the best version of himself on the Atlanta Falcons. I think this is great news despite all of the trade rumors that were surrounding Kyle Pitts. Curious what your thoughts are on this one, Nick. But before we get to you, Falcons fans, in the comment section below, let us know your thoughts. Did you want them to trade Pitts, or did you see the potential? Did you still see that Pitts just needed a little bit of an extra push, maybe a change of quarterback? Is that what he needed to get back to that former rookie year glory that we saw? Let us know your thoughts on the situation in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this latest update for the Falcons?
Yeah, look, obviously this move by the Falcons, it involves Kyle Pitts, but it's a move made for the quarterback position. And anytime you get close to the new league year, free agency trades, as they start to become closer and closer to being a reality, you've got to dive deep into the numbers. And if you look at Kyle Pitts' situation, if they were to trade Kyle Pitts, which there's a lot of rumors they're going to try and trade him and not get a whole lot in return, maybe like a fifth round pick, the goal would be to open up that $10.8 million of cap space, according to overthecap.com. The Atlanta Falcons currently are about $5 million over the cap, so that $10 million would put them under the cap, which is where they need to be. The one exception, of course, is if they find a way to move off of Kirk Cousins. There's a bunch of things they could do. If Cousins waives his trade clause, they can trade him, open up some cap space, designate him a post-June 1st release. That'll open up a lot as well. So I think the decision to stick with Kyle Pitts, to me, is a twofold. One, it's a further proof that Kirk Cousins is gone. He's not going to be the backup quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons in 2025. I know they've been saying, and Fontenot's been saying, hey, listen, we're okay if Cousins is our QB2. That ain't going to happen, right? If they had moved off of Kirk Cousins, if they have done some other moved off of Kyle Pitts, and done some other salary cap things, I would have said, well, maybe they find a way to make Kirk Cousins' salary work as QB2. Even though I wouldn't agree with that move, maybe that's what they're doing. The reality is sticking with Kyle Pitts and the opportunity to trade him and open up that $11 million of cap space, the fact that they're not doing that, to me, Kirk Cousins is gone, which to me is a big statement that Michael Penix Jr., they are 100% behind him. And I also think it's very interesting, however, that the decision to stick with Kyle Pitts and the expectations out of Pitts means that they expect Penix Jr. to have those same kind of expectations out of the young tight end himself. And I think this is one of the benefits of a guy like Penix Jr., who's an older quarterback, right? He played a lot of college football. He's been around the game a long time, played at a very high level collegiately, obviously did well down the stretch last year for Atlanta. One of the reasons you have kind of a grown-up being your franchise quarterback is he knows and can manage the expectations of these younger stars that we're waiting to see breakout years, whether it's Pitts, whether it's London, Bijan Robinson taking that next step. Obviously, he's already a superstar. The reality is the Atlanta Falcons are 100% going as far as Michael Penix Jr. takes them. And I think the decision to stick with Kyle Pitts, number one, is an indication that Kirk Cousins is gone, right? That's the QB room is not going to have Kirk Cousins in 2025. That's what this move told me. But also it's put a lot of the grip on Penix Jr. to save this Falcons offense and to save Kyle Pitts' career and get this team headed the right direction in 2025.
Yeah, Nick, and I think especially when you look at Kyle Pitts and what he brought to the table for Penix, it wasn't a whole lot as far as stats and things like that go. But when you see the last 3 games of the season where Penix was named the starter, he came in, did a lot of good work in those games. And I think that's why we're at the situation we're at now, why he is now the starter. I think Kyle Pitts brought some good stuff to the table. The first game, that was the first, real start for Penix. Kind of throw that one out the window. Look at the last 2 games, especially against the Washington Commanders, which arguably a really good team. They made it very far in the postseason. So that's an admirable team to do well against. Hits there, 44 yards. He had a touchdown as well. Penix only threw 3 touchdowns in the last end of the season, and one of those was to Pitts. Pitts went 4 catches on 5 targets there. In the last game of season against the Panthers, he went 2 of 2. So I think there's starting to build a connection. I know it was 3 games. I know it was very loose, and there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pictures when you have a young quarterback there. But I think the fact that Michael Penix seemed to kind of be able to lean on Kyle Pitts at the very end of the season, especially in the red zone, being able to get him a touchdown target as well of the 3 that he was able to throw at the end of the season. I think that bodes well for Pitts' future because we all know what he's capable of. Back in 2021, the guy was great. I mean, he did really, really phenomenal. He was even pretty good in 2022 as well, just not really the yardage wise. He's a couple down yardage years, but his stats per PFF were good. But that 2021 year, I think that's what his ceiling is. That's what you can get out of a guy like Kyle Pitts, 1,000-yard receiver. It's a guy who I don't even think he was utilized that well. He only had 1 touchdown that season, so I don't think they really used his full 6'6", 250-pound frame to its advantage. The guy's a good red zone threat. I think we see that later on in his career as well. Every year, getting more and more touchdowns. I think Michael Penix sees that. I think there's room for improvement there for both of them. And I think that with this move, Atlanta is showing that they have some smart plans for the future. It involves Penix and it involves Kyle Pitts as well. And I think this is just really a good sign to me that we're going to see a big jump year for Pitts this coming season.
Yeah, and just a few things to really focus on here is that the Atlanta Falcons, of course, like I mentioned, right now they're over the salary cap, about $5 million over. When you have a young quarterback and a rookie quarterback on his rookie contract, you usually have a lot of cap space. Usually, you're trying to like overpay for players to bring in veterans to surround the young quarterback with a lot of talent. The Falcons already have the talent around Penix Jr. to be very, very successful. So the question is there: do you insert some volatility, right? Do you insert some turnover? Do you sit there and say, hey, listen, Michael Penix Jr., he's got some talented guys. Kyle Pitts hasn't lived up to the hype, but he certainly has, the pedigree. We've seen it before, like you said, in 2021. Do you move off of Pitts and insert some volatility to make things harder for Michael Penix Jr. going into year 2, his first full season as a starter? I don't think that'd be necessarily a great strategy, right? Maybe you could get a better tight end. Maybe you'd be willing to, maybe you trade for one or however you acquire one. But the reality is you want some stability around the offense here to help Michael Penix Jr. take that step into his second season. And again, first season where he's coming into his career as the full-time starter. And I know a lot of people are disappointed in Kyle Pitts, but again, going back to the numbers, and this is what really matters. Currently, Kyle Pitts is only overvalued in terms of how much they pay him by $4 million based on overthecap.com's valuation. Over the Cap does a great job. They look at a player's age, position, statistics, all this kind of stuff and say, okay, this is how much he should cost against a salary cap. Right now, the Atlanta Falcons are paying Pitts $4 million over that number. If you go back to the Kirk Cousins, they're $19 million over that number, right? So again, you look at the better decision of who to cut and run, it obviously would be Kirk Cousins. You get much more bang for your buck. You're cutting a more depreciating asset as opposed to Kyle Pitts, who still is relatively cheap in terms of raw dollars. Again, we're looking at a salary cap that's over $275 million. So a $10 million cap hit on a starting tight end who has a high ceiling. We've seen, of course, him have a 1,000-yard season a few years ago. Isn't the worst thing in the world. Now, look, this Atlanta Falcons team, I think the biggest question mark for me going forward is can they give Michael Penix Jr. the tools to be successful in the long term? And Miles, I'll throw this over to you as a question. Do you think that they're going to change the offense with Penix Jr., or do you think they're still going to be that zone scheme with Bijan Robinson and then play action like they wanted to be with Kirk Cousins before he had the injury issues, before the Achilles concerns really flared up and did a lot of damage to their strategy? Do you think they want to go that play action route, that kind of McVay Shanahan offense, or do you think they go full 100% Penix Jr. spread attack like he ran in college?
I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. I know it's a safe answer, but I don't think they fully throw out the play action attack because they didn't really ever get to execute it the way that it was supposed to be executed. Kirk Cousins, quite frankly, did a pretty poor job at executing that attack. He really, it's supposed to be, he ran a lot of play action, more than almost anybody, and it just didn't work. They didn't get a lot of, yardage out of him. He didn't really do what he was supposed to do with it. So I think Penix is a guy that sprinkle in a little spread, sprinkle a little that more West Coast Shanahan style of offense here. I think he's going to thrive in whatever you throw for him. And I think that this is going to be an offense that is going to be a little different, but I don't think they throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think they keep this squad together just because there's a lot to look at with this team, especially you bring up a good point. You talk about, the value of Penix, the value of Pitts, what he brings to the table. And I want to bring up one more point as far as that, and maybe hear your thoughts on this too, Nick, is when you look at the free agency market, you look at tight ends, there really isn't anybody out there. So this is a smart move. Falcons fans, you might say, well, let's go see who's out there. There isn't anybody. And I'll read through the names. There's like 6 of them. You got Juwan Johnson, who caught 500 receiving yards this year, not any better than Pitts, and he's getting a little bit older as well. Zach Ertz, older, not any better than Pitts. You got Tommy Tremble and Tyler Conklin. I don't know why Patrick Ricard's on the list as a tight end. He's technically a fullback, so that's not who you want. And then Austin Hooper is probably the most interesting guy on the list, but again, really did struggle with a bad Patriots team. So there's no one on this list that I would take over Kyle Pitts. I think he's the best option here, Nick.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And look, sometimes being an NFL team, NFL GM, trying to create a roster, you're sort of stuck with the living in reality, living in real world, right? You obviously would love to get better at every position, every offseason, and find a way to perfectly allocate dollars, but you can only sign players that are available. You can only trade for players that are available. You can only draft players that fall to you. You can only draft players that are available in that draft class. So you have to take that with that approach, which I think is what the Atlanta Falcons did here as well. You bring up a great point. I think they factored in everything. I think they said, listen, we're not getting a whole lot return if we trade Kyle Pitts in terms of salary cap relief. We're going to probably have to cut Kirk Cousins. That's what's going to happen at this point, unless someone's willing to trade for Cousins. We'll have to wait and see if that actually shakes out and Kirk Cousins waives his no trade clause there. They looked at the options of, is it worth the volatility and the turnover? Probably not. And are we going to get anybody better? And the reality is, look, unless you're willing to get a veteran Ertz or bringing Hooper back, right, or something like that into the fold in Atlanta, and just have a savvy vet with a young quarterback, which maybe that's something, but at this point, right, you're not getting a huge amount of return for all that volatility, right? And I think that's exactly what the Atlanta Falcons looked at this, and they said, we want to make Michael Penix's job as simple as possible, keep a lot of the pieces in place, and just focus on improving, not just changing. I think that was a big part of this move by the Atlanta Falcons, and overall, when you look at the structure of the offense and really the quarterback room itself, this was a really smart move.